So this brings us to question 11, and I'll try to get all the way through to 20 on this one, and we'll see how that goes. But if you look at question 11, and you look at the red box that I have around the stimulus data, we're not even really looking at the question yet. One habit you might want to consider adopting, and these are only suggestions as I've mentioned, is to force yourself to read the question first and decide if you're going to do it. You could read all of the stimulus material, come to the question, and say to yourself, wow, I have no idea what I'm reading. And you want to make those decisions quickly. So let's see what this says. It says, this assessment, so this is not a lesson, this is an assessment that the teacher's giving, would be an appropriate way to test the student's ability to perform which of the following phonemic awareness tasks. And I cover the content of phonemic awareness and its constituents and where it begins and ultimately where it leads in a separate set of videos that I'll point out maybe at the end. I think I said I wouldn't, but why not? In order for you to determine if which of the items A, B, C, or D are correct, now we can read the stimulus material with that in mind. And there's a couple of ways to do it. You can go ahead and read the stimulus data, which is what I'm going to do, or you could read the answers, the possible answers, and then apply them to the question. But rather than do that in this example, I'll just start at the beginning. So phonemic awareness is the skill we're looking at, but we want to determine what aspect of phonemic awareness we're talking about, and it's a specific aspect. So the teacher shows a picture and asks, what is this a picture of? And the teacher displays a picture of a boat. And the student says, a boat? And the teacher confirms that, a boat, that's right. Now let's say the word boat slowly together, ba-o-t. The student pronounces the word with the teacher. How many sounds do you hear? Ba-o-t. The teacher repeats the word. 3. That's right, 3. Now I'd like you to do this for some more words. Okay, so what is being assessed in this aspect of phonemic awareness is something specific, and that's phoneme counting. This is a part of segmenting. When the child is able to do something like hear and count all of the phonemes heard in a word, that's a very, very high-level skill, and you need to see what fits and what doesn't. And counting and blending the phonemes into a word, blending would mean that the student would be putting those things back together again. And that is not what's going on in here. There is counting, but you got to read through the entire question and see if blending occurs. And there was no ba-ot, boat, or ba-o, or bo, boat, or something like that. So that's out. There wasn't any blending that occurred. Identifying onsets and rhymes. I cover onsets and rhymes in a separate set of videos, but that's not what's going on in here. Just briefly, there's not like a word family. For example, there's not the "and" family, and the child's learning to identify "t" and "tan" and "m" and "man" and things of that nature. The "and" is the rhyme portion of the word, and the onsets would be any consonant that precedes that word family or that vowel or vowel-consonant combination. Recognizing how many phonemes are contained in a word, that's what's going on here. That's counting. And that is the correct answer in this one. And again, it's a matter of looking at the stimulus data, but not maybe right at the beginning. It's looking at the stimulus data when it's appropriate, and the time that it's appropriate is after you've looked at what the question is, and that's contained right here. This is the question, and that's what's going to help you figure out what it is. Relating phonemes to letters. There's no print that's given in this example. It was a picture, and that's really typical of phonemic awareness activities. And they do not use print. They do not use letters, so that one is out. One other question that I get from previous classes I've taught using this material or similar material is what's the difference between like phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. Phonological awareness is just a general awareness of sounds. It's like a dominant category. Transportation, which could include things like planes, trains, automobiles. And that's sort of what happens with phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is going to be a specific skill, looking at initial sounds, final sounds, medial sounds, blending sounds, and the highest level segmenting sounds. And again, I cover that elsewhere. Let's look at question 12. And again, if we were going to choose between 11 and 12, both of these count the same, I would do question 12 first. This is the first one I would do. But I'm just trying to do these in order now, so I digress. The use of rhyming text for kindergarten read-alouds is likely to promote the reading development of kindergarten students primarily by, and so again, we're dealing with kindergarten, so that's going to mean dealing with the foundations of reading, and that is phonological awareness, the general awareness of sounds, rhyming words together. The cat sat on the mat, and so forth. That's what it's going to work on, is the awareness of sounds, getting to hear similar sounds or similar chunks of language or word families or what have you in spoken language. It could increase the students' vocabulary. It certainly could. It's not going to mean that the students aren't going to learn some new words maybe that they've never heard before, but that's not the focus of what this activity is doing. The read aloud is used in this way is really for phonological awareness, the general awareness of sounds. Could it enhance their understanding of story elements? It could, if the picture is supporting the speech and stuff, that could work, but that's not the primary focus. And letter recognition, it's not indicating that the students are tracking print with the teacher. They're just listening, it seems like. So if we were to pick it apart, which is what I did, A is the one that comes out as the most correct answer there. If we look at 13, and this is a doable question, I'd say. Let's see if I can get that in the window a little bit better. Which of the following strategies would best help a kindergarten student who is having difficulty visually discriminating between letters B and D? So this is the way that I recommend you think through it. Essentially, the student has probably seen these letters and been having the problem for some time of distinguishing B and D because they're visually similar. The only difference really is which direction the circle is pointing, right? You got to stick in a circle, and in the distinguish a B and a D, it's just where the position of that circle is pointing. So if we were to try to figure out which response is the correct response, it's the one that's going to use additional skills to try to reinforce that letter. We've already tried sight and maybe even speech associations. It's not enough. So now we want to use a multi-sensory technique. And A is providing that, helping the student focus on the directionality of each letter as the student traces it. So the student would be doing something like down, up, and around for B, and maybe around, up, and down for D, and tracing it with the finger, sandpaper letters, writing it in sand, anything to get that student to associate the shape with the name of the letter and the direction of certain elements to indicate which letter it happens to be. So you'd need a multisensory technique for that. Having the student look at letters within the text of the text of a favorite picture book, that's something you certainly could do. It's probably not going to do any harm, but it is not systematic enough, and it is not multisensory enough. So we've tried one set of senses, they didn't work, so now we're going to try others. Repeating the names of each letter several times as the student points to the letter. Again, you certainly could do that, but that's not what's going to be multisensory enough. There is some multisensory stuff going on in this response, but it's not as comprehensive as A. Encouraging the student to observe closely as the teacher writes the letters. Modeling is certainly a part of the learning process, but again, here it is simply not engaging enough. It is not multisensory enough for it to be correct, which is why 13 is the answer you want. Let's take a look at 14 now, and here we have a first grader who can identify the letters of the alphabet and decode a number of simple words. He becomes confused, however, when tracking print in consecutive lines of print. Which of the following strategies is likely to be most effective in helping the student read a short paragraph of simple text? Well, once again, something that you want to look at and something that you want to consider is what kind of a scaffold is going to benefit the student the most, because let's really make sure that we understand what's going on in here. We have a child who can name the letters. We have a child who can maybe do like CVC words. what we have is a child who has problems with becoming confused when we have a lot of print and a lot of lines together, which is what you see right here. Like maybe the student would be able to do the opening lines, but would get lost the longer the paragraph goes. So what are you going to do for such a student? I presume that you've been observing in elementary classrooms, particularly primary classrooms, and you've seen students tracking print with their fingers or using maybe a highlighter on a photocopied section of the text. And that type of a scaffold is forcing the student to pay attention to each line by line, and read line by line and word by word and understand word boundaries and all that sort of thing. You may have also seen teachers who might use a piece of an index card or something like that with the center cut out. That's what this would represent. And so then what happens is that student's going to be reading each sentence and then using that tool to go down each sentence or something like that. And again, this is multisensory. The student was having difficulty without any kind of scaffolding, so now we're going to use the fingers. So you could go from an index card to a finger, and then eventually you want to remove that crutch, because that will slow reading down, presumably, if the child's got to point to everything as they read. If we look at some of the other options, helping them sound out unfamiliar words included in the text before reading the paragraph, you certainly could do that. There probably will be words that the child's going to have difficulty with, but that's not the nature of the problem here. The nature of the problem is consecutive lines of text are presenting a challenge to the student. That's that concepts about print, return, sweep thing, and the child's having some difficulty with that. Help him increase his reading rate to improve his understanding of the continuity between words and sentences and paragraphs. And again, you certainly could do that, but that is not a direct enough scaffold. The only one that really is doing that so far is B. Modify the paragraph by using a yellow highlighter to identify natural groupings of words and phrases within the paragraphs. And again, you want to look at the most effective thing, and that could be effective if you're looking at a child's getting lost in, let's say, appositive phrases. The man, comma, who is an off-duty policeman, comma, caught the bank robber. And maybe the child's having problems with the positives or introductory phrases or something like that. In that sense, maybe D would be effective. But here, we're just looking at, this is a very young person, first grade, having trouble tracking and tracking print and understanding return sweeps, etc. So in this context, only B is correct. So let's take a look at 15 if we could. We get that in the window for you, and let's see what it says. Which of the following instructional practices would be most effective in promoting kindergarten's understanding of the alphabetic principle? Alphabetic principle, my friends, that is simply attaching a sound to a letter. Usually you begin with the letter names like A, B, C, D, E. And a letter like C is problematic, if I can put that up here, because it has two different sounds associated with it. It's got a hard sound like K, as in cat and can and things like that, or cot, C-O-T. It also has a soft sound, like when you have a word like city, for example, or celery. So when C is followed by E, it's soft. When it's followed by A or O, it's hard. You want to look up those words yourself. But when we're talking about the alphabetic principle, we're talking about very early entry into understanding that one letter, one sound. And then we got to go beyond it when you start attaching what are called allophones to a particular letter or sound you're dealing with. So for C, probably C is for city, C is for cereal, C is for celery. That's going to make more sense because we're talking about a one-to-one relationship between the letter and the sound. Out of all of these possible answers, then you have to look for the one that is actually looking at or directly relating to the alphabetic principle. And in this case, routinely saying words routinely saying the sounds in the words when writing the words on the board, that is something that's going to foster this type of development. Much more so than what you see in B. A writing center is certainly useful, and all of the supplies that are there are great. Nothing wrong with those. The only problem is that it's not focused enough on one specific thing, which is the alphabetic principle. Even C, where you're dealing with environmental print and labeling all the objects that are in the room, certainly that's helpful, and certainly teachers do that, and certainly teachers do that to associate print to concrete objects and things like that, but it's not systematic enough. A really is your best bet. Stopping frequently during reading to carefully pronounce and define important words. That's, think aloud and things like that are certainly things that teachers do, but what's the problem with it's not systematic enough. It is not targeted enough. It is not one-to-one with the alphabetic principle. The only one there that is doing it is A. So if we were to go to 16 here, let me just make sure that lines up in the window okay. And it seems to be doing so. Let's make sure, though. We have an emergent reader frequently reverses some letters and numbers during writing tasks. Which of the following strategies would be most effective in helping this student develop more accurate letter formation skills? Okay, so once again we have letter confusions that we're looking at or that we're dealing with. And also numbers. The child might be having some trouble writing the 3. It looks more like an E than a 3 or something like that. And so the question is how best to address it. Well, once again, you have to look at those responses and try to determine which one is the answer that really parallels what is presented in the conditions of the question. And it's really only B that does that. Having the student practice tracing the target letter shape with the finger while saying aloud the sequence of steps to form the letter. So using metacognitive language like down, up, and around as the student's tracing, that's what you want to do. We saw that earlier already, so that one should have been a pretty easy one to grasp. If we look at some of the other options, like providing the student with supplemental practice writing lists of words that are spelled with the target letters, that's something that certainly could be done, but it's not systematic enough, and it is probably what led to the identification of the particular problem, which is forming letters. So you can't continue doing the same thing. That hasn't been working. You've got to go after something else, and that is, in this case, to go after multisensory techniques. Providing a student with a supplemental handwriting workbook that describes the formation of the target letters in a series of steps. Certainly good supplemental material, maybe good material to use as a scaffold, but the thing that's most complete and most correct is B, because it's multisensory, it's displaying a response that's in line with the conditions of the question. Encouraging the student to vocalize words when writing, especially when with the words that contain the target letters. And again, this sounds really good. It's using some metacognitive language, but it is not multisensory enough. It simply is not multisensory enough. The one that is the most multisensory is, in fact, B. Let's take a look at 17 now, and here we have a written word, and that written word is chimpanzee. In the word chimpanzee, which of the following pairs of letters is a digraph? And once again, I cover blends digraphs and diphthongs and vowel digraphs, vowel blends, and things of that nature in separate videos. But just to make this accessible, if this is the first time you're ever seeing the word digraph, if you write it and highlight the letters PH, that is a clear example of a digraph right here. Let's see if I can get my little pointer to work. And why is this thing a digraph? It's a digraph because you don't say digraph pa-ha, right? You get one sound out of it. And that's what happens with a digraph. You put the digraph together and you get a single sound. You don't get a blend. It's not digraph pa-ha. It's digraph, one single sound. So di is two, digraph, two letters that equal one sound. If you want a trick for remembering what a blend is, you can simply write blend. And blend actually has two blends in it. I'll show you where they are. The BL in blend is a blend, and the ND in blend is a blend. How do I know? Because I can hear both sounds. B-ul, bull, and ND. You hear both sounds. So blend, you hear all of the sounds. Digraph, you get one sound out of it. There are also trigraphs, for example, that I won't cover today, but they do exist. Digraph, very easy. PH in digraph is a digraph. So out of all of these options, A is the most correct. This is a blend, so that's out. An is really a word family or a rhyme. A-N, that vowel consonant combination is what we would call a rhyme. You know it as a word family, like man and tan, can. So that's out. It's not a digraph. This is where things get problematic because there are such things as vowel diagraphs, and you're looking at one. And you've probably heard the refrain, when two vowels are walking, the first one is talking, and it's usually saying its name. So that E is, saying a long vowel right here. And this is a vowel digraph. The writers, I don't think were very careful when they did that, but they don't care. The one that I would pick then, that's most obviously a digraph, is this consonant combination. So that's what I would do. This is I don't know how they're looking at it, a vowel team, I guess. It's really a vowel digraph, so I don't know what they have in mind. Maybe that's one of their money makers. 18. A kindergarten student has demonstrated the ability to write phonetically, but she is reluctant to write because she is worried about misspelling words. The teacher could best promote the student's reading and writing development by, and in this case, it's to work on something particular, which is reluctance. And this is someone who, if you correct and correct and correct every 5 minutes, the child probably is going to have a hard time learning. The child's already got some anxiety about making mistakes, so why would you want to do things that are going to make the student feel even more uncomfortable about making mistakes? So within the bounds of the question, to my mind, it's really quite clear that A is the one that is correct here, reassuring her that it's okay for now to express herself in writing by spelling words as they sound. Giving her a spelling list of high-frequency words to copy and learn each day is not going to reduce anxiety. This A is what's going to do that. Helping her make a list of words that she already knows how to spell correctly. That's a good support strategy. Kids love to feel a sense of accomplishment and so forth, so that's certainly something that you could do, but it is not really getting at what the nature of the problem is, and only A does that. Suggesting that she spend time copying some of the words found in her favorite stories. Again, you certainly could do that, but it is not going to get at really what the issue is. Let's take a look at 19 now, if we could. And in this one, it says, during which of the following stages of spelling development do students typically begin to show an understanding of the correspondence between letters and sounds? Well, let me just briefly remind you of what the spelling stages are. And you have what we call pre-phonetic, and I'll try to write that in here, pre-phonetic. It's a little rough trying to write with this pen. That is what pre-communicative is. It's pre-phonetic. It's the scribble stage. This is where a student is going to be doing something like... if you ask them to write bread, they'll draw you some bread, for example. Later development, they might actually be producing some random shapes, like, a number 1, a smiley face, a triangle, and a happy face. That is certainly not writing in English yet, but at least the student is giving you some indication that he or she understands, excuse me, the nature of how sounds and letters correspond, that there's symbols are communicating sounds that we find in the English language, right? Right. Okay, so pre-phonetic is one stage, and then the next is what we call phonetic. And so I'll try to write that in here. It looks like I'm going to have a little grief with this pen. Phonetic. And so semi-phonetic would be a stage that's right about here, okay? It's like kind of phonetic. Phonetic spellings really are the ones where you get somebody who is writing out all of the dominant sounds. Like in bread, you would hear a B, an R, and a D. Like all the sounds are accounted for, or even a complete spelling like B, R, E, D. Very late phonetic spelling. Semi-phonetic spelling might be where you're getting a dominant sound or maybe two dominant sounds or something like that. So it's sort of in between pre-phonetic or pre-communicative and phonetic, somewhere in the middle. Phonetic, I've already given you an example of it. It's more complete. The child's getting nearly all the sounds, if not all the dominant sounds that are in there. Transitional spellings, just so you know, this occurs when the child writes down a word bread like B-R-A-D-E or B-R-A-E-D. And you might wonder why something like that would happen. And the reason for it is that, as I told you about those vowel teams just a second ago, like EA, and when two vowels are walking, the first one does the talking, and that it's usually saying its name, right? So that should be like a long E, when you have that, like in read. And so bread should be pronounced breed, really, if we were being really strict. It isn't. But the child is probably thinking that there's no possible way that EA could be marking the short vowel sound. So I know there's an E in there somewhere, so I'll try it at the end, I'll try it here. And it takes time until the child becomes a conventional speller where they begin to work out some of those challenges in English where you get rule breakers in there like bread, and they finally spell it correctly. So this is an approximation of a rule or an approximation of a letter pattern. Phonetic is getting all the dominant sounds in the word. Semi-phonetic is really early stuff, getting one initial sound or maybe a B and an R, a B and a D, but not as late or not as advanced as nailing all the sounds, where the child's simply missing the vowel pattern in the word. If I go back to 21, let me move this up so that we can try to see this, and just give me 1 moment to do that. And so here we have 20. Function words such as to, the, and of are most appropriately taught in the context of which of the following areas of reading instruction. And so with sight word recognition, we call them sight words because they break rules all the time for phonics. Words like where, W-H-E-R-E, and when, W-H-E-N, those, can be problematic and easily confused. And, they're not as contextual. A word like cat, when you say cat and you know what a cat is, it's going to register. A word like the or a or an, those have to be attached to something like the cat, a cat, an apple. And that's how they, kind of get their meaning and specificity, and, whether or not they're indicating generally a cat or the cat, a specific one. Out of all of these possibilities that you see in here, where we're talking about phonics skills and practice, well, that's definitely out, because what the big deal is with a sight word or a function word, which is what these are, is that they're rule breakers. So A is out. Structural analysis, that too is out, because that would be dealing with a word like denationalization, where we'd be analyzing it for prefix, suffix, and root. Structural analysis is really not going to work for these. Structural analysis is where you need polysyllabic words for that. Academic language development, it's not specific to academic language development. Of course, academic language will be built around or built with these types of function words, but you're not going to get so far, understanding microbiology by memorizing these things, right? These are sight words, so D is what's correct. I guess the big trick, or what the big payoff in this question is, you're able to understand function words to indicate sight words, and it's not so challenging to do if you know what the sight words are. That does tend to help. And like I said, I covered this stuff in some of the other videos I've made, so hopefully you'll review those if you find that you need to. For goodness sakes, don't do it if you don't need to. It brings us to 21 now. A first grade teacher provides students with explicit, systematic phonics instruction to promote their reading development. So let me pause on that for a moment. When you're talking about systematic instruction, usually you're talking about instruction that has teacher modeling, guided practice, independent practice, and perhaps as part of that independent practice, you go back to a real context. So you practice something in isolation, and then you take it back to a real context. When designing activities to teach sound letter correspondences, the answer that is correct is A, providing reading opportunities for students to practice sounds in context after studying the sounds in isolation. So they've sort of built this backwards. Here's what you do first, study them in isolation, and here's what you do last. So it's a little tricky the way they set that question up. The rest of these are wrong for the context. Make certain that students have mastered the vowel sounds before focusing on the consonants. I don't know if I've ever heard of such a thing. Maybe there's some program that does that, but really what we're after is this business with systematic phonics instruction, and that is found here. Isolation, then back to context. Ensure that students master the spelling of practice words using the target sound before teaching a new sound. Again, is not really part of what type of systematic phonics instruction we're talking about here. This would be working on a word family, like making sure the child can see and say the word family and then learn how to manipulate onsets like ka and ta, and then read them in a sentence like the cat sat on the mat, the cat sat on the tan mat, things like that. I don't know. Include instruction in related consonant blends when introducing individual consonants. This is a big no-no, and let me tell you why it's a no-no. In systematic phonics instruction, usually you're developing one skill, not two together, and D is making a mess because you're introducing more advanced skills beyond what the student presumably can do. All right, well, I'll be back and we'll take it hopefully through items 22 through 30. We'll see if we can do it.